Hello, Build Stuff. Welcome back. We are live from all over the world to all over the world using hundreds of thousands of kilometers of cable. What could possibly go wrong? So far, nothing. It's a good day, great day for a conference, great sessions this morning. It is my pleasure to introduce next up on the Build Stuff virtual AC/DC stage. She is the head of design at Data Art, running a design and development studio with about 100 people working all over the world on all kinds of interesting and innovative UX applications in finance, healthcare, all kinds of industries. She's going to be talking to us today, Swiss Army Man, what a UX designer consists of. Please give a big Build Stuff welcome, Anastasia Rezhepp.
Hello. Hello, everyone. And yes, I will be talking about this Swiss Army man, as I called it. And, well, if it were a live conference, I think my first question would be, who is there in the audience? Are there any UX designers, or are all of you developers or maybe managers? But I won't ask it, and we'll just start with this picture. And that could have been actually my second question, if you know what it is. You can answer in the chat. I will check it later. So this is called cadavre ski, or in English, it's exquisite corpse. And I'm sorry if you think that those pictures are not very decent. It's not my fault. It's all Salvador Dali and André Breton and other people. So this was the game invented at the beginning of the 20th century by surrealists and Dadaists. And the game is like that. The first person draws a part of the body, somebody's head. Then they fold up the paper, and the next person has to draw the shoulders, then the body, not seeing what was there at the beginning. And this makes what you see on the screen, some Frankenstein monster or exquisite corpse. This is some creature consisting of different parts, not really connected with each other. And the thing is, why I'm talking about it, because I truly believe that a good UX designer is very similar to this exquisite corpse, because he or she must consist of very different skills coming from different backgrounds. And this is what I talk about today, what these parts are. And please note that it's not going to be about technical stuff at all. I'm not going to talk about how to quickly create prototypes in Figma. It's a completely different thing. And here are the parts of the UX body that I'm going to talk about. So you can see that there are 5 different sections. I will describe all of them briefly and then give some practical advice on how to develop them in yourself or in somebody else. Even from this picture, you can see that they are very, very different. For example, the things on the right-hand side are more about graphic design, and the things on the left usually come with some technical background or some scientific background. So it's not so easy to combine them. I'm talking about it because, as it was said, we have more than 100 people in our design studio. About half of them are designers, but I observe how they interact with their projects and the other people every day. So these are all my own conclusions and observations, and I think that I know what I'm talking about. And I must also say that we know how to teach people to be UX designers. So in case if you, for example, decided to become a UX designer, or maybe you have kids whom you want to train as designers, or maybe you just want to develop your skills a little bit, I hope that there will be something for you in this talk. Okay, let's start with some explanations. So first of all, every UX designer needs this conceptual or strategic thinking skill. Why is it so important? You know, I observe quite a lot of graphic design people who turn into user experience designers, and very often they have this problem. They think in images, which is a good thing. But at the same time, when it comes to user experience, what can happen is that they very quickly turn their thinking into pictures, and then they forget to think further, like what's going on next. For a user experience designer, it's very important not to be like in today paradigm, but also to always remember what is there yesterday and what is going to be tomorrow. So it's really important to see the whole picture at once, otherwise it won't work. And I can give you an example from one of our recent projects. What happened there was that the project had a very tight timeline. I participated in it myself somehow, and we needed to make a clickable prototype in a couple of weeks in a tight collaboration with our client. And we didn't have time for any preliminary work there. We just jumped into wireframes and designs straight away. And the client knew about that, but at the same time, we had this conversation every single day. He looked at our design and was like, okay, so now I see this screen with the user logged in, and what's going to happen if he's not logged in? And we were like, we didn't think about it. And he said, how come? You had to think about it in advance. So it always happens when you start thinking screen by screen, you need to somehow know the whole picture. The next thing is this ability to dive into different contexts quickly. Again, this is a skill very popular in business analyst world, but many designers, especially graphic people, don't have it straight away. And at DataArt, we work with all those complex systems. So it's a little bit more complicated usually than, for example, creating interface for hotels booking, about which people mostly know at least something. But if you create a system about asset management or some tool for surgeons to plan their surgeries, then it's very different. You need to understand what you are doing. I frankly don't know if it is possible to develop an asset management app not understanding the asset management, but I can tell you that it's hardly possible to make a convenient user experience design if you don't know what it is. So this is also something that user experience people need to have in themselves. The next one is my favorite topic. It's about communication skills, different kinds of communication skills, presentation and argumentation and everything. And why is it so important? Let me tell you. I participated in dozens of projects, and never have I ever heard a designer tell something like this: "Oh, you .NET developer, I don't think that your code is right. I have some suggestions how to change it. Maybe we shall take a look and change something in your code." It just never happens. At the same time, .NET developers quite often have an opinion about our designs. It happens because of all this design thing, even if it's not about graphic design, but about user experience, it's so subjective, and people communicate with some user experience stuff in their everyday life. That's why everyone has some opinion, and in order to succeed, you somehow need to be able to work with all those opinions that come to you. We recently had this situation when our client showed our designs to his 10-year-old son, and then he came back and said, "My son didn't like it. He said that it was not usable and not trendy." And this was not the app for 10-year-olds. Absolutely. And we had to deal with this opinion somehow. So this is really one of the major parts of the user experience designer skill set. The next thing, I call it being well watched. I'm not sure that this kind of word exists. But I think this is one of the most important skills for UX people as well. This is the ability to get the right example out of your head quickly. It helps greatly in design work. If you manage to have I don't know, filtering from Amazon versus eBay in your head and to know where to use it, it's really convenient. It's convenient to design faster, and you can keep the conversation going. So it's really a great thing to remember everything that you saw in your interface world. And again, I can give you one example from the real life. We had this business analyst who went to the client's office, and her task was to create a clickable prototype in this collaboration with the stakeholders. Business analysts sometimes are quite good in working with prototypes, and so was she. But at the same time, she called us, the design team, almost every day to consult on different things. For example, there was this situation when she designed this screen with 3 tabs for filtering. And then they discussed it with the stakeholders and decided that there were 5 options within those filters. And she just didn't know what to do because 5 tabs didn't fit into the screen, and she couldn't remember any other option. That's why she had to consult the user experience people. And the last thing is having some visual skills. If we talk about user experience, I don't usually mean creating flashy interfaces. It's not about UI, but usually user experience anyway ends up with some prototype. And in order to create anything visual, you need to understand at least the basics, because otherwise, if the screen that you're designing gets too cluttered, the users won't understand what's going on, and there will be a problem. So some basics are needed even for the user experience people who claim that they are more about preliminary artifacts and not the visual design. So you can see that this makes quite a various person altogether. And basically some of those skills are better developed in people with, I don't know, right hand mind, and the others with the left hand side of their mind developed. And this makes it exciting and difficult, but I must say that from my observations, it is possible to develop everything in most of the people. And for example, at DataArt, we have this trainee program, and it's 3 months of hard work. But we know that in 3 months, it's usually possible to make quite a decent junior user experience designer, basing on what we had at the beginning, and it can be just anything. Okay, let me just give a few pieces of advice how to deal with those skills. So the first one is this conceptual strategic thinking. Usually what we do here is we make people solve a lot of analytical quizzes and tasks. They're quite good just to open your mind in the right direction. Then there is this whole set of user experience artifacts, which were specifically created so that not to lose the picture of the whole. So there is the whole set, and they're all useful and they're good to know. And the third is being capable of answering every question about yesterday and tomorrow when seeing the today's picture. The tools and frameworks that user experience people usually use, they are quite different. It usually starts with some personas, so those fictional characters to show who is going to use the system. And then you can create sitemaps and mind maps. I'm sure that you're familiar with those artifacts. And it's also very, very useful to create something like user flows and block schemes to show what will happen in the system from the very beginning to the very end of the user journey. If you are more proficient, you can also continue with customer journey maps and service blueprints and all that stuff. But for the beginning, it's good if you are capable of at least creating the mind map of your future products and a few user flows. And there are tons of materials on that on the web, dozens of different courses, so it's not a problem to study this. Then this thing of answering the questions. We use it quite a lot in our trainee program. What you can see on the left, it's the real design from one of our trainees. And what happens there is that they design something, some app, and then they have to defend it in front of a couple of design leads. And those design leads start torturing this poor trainee, asking different questions. For example, if you see something like this, they could ask, let's say, we see 3 tabs here. What's going to happen if there are 12 of them? Okay, please describe us what's going on behind those 3 dots. What's going to happen if you click this back arrow on this screen? What's going to happen if the text is not 3 lines but 25? The idea is that even the task for this designer was to create only 2 screens in order to show the visual design skills. He or she must be capable of seeing the whole picture and answering all those questions, at least theoretically. And then I'm going to show a couple of books. I'm personally a book reader. I truly believe that a book is the best present. I know that people are different. So if you don't like books, you can find something like that in the internet. There are a lot of articles, a lot of videos, but I'll be talking about the books. First of all, I really love this one. What is the name of this book? This is Raymond Smalling. You probably know about him. He was quite popular in the post-Soviet times. My parents had a few of his books at home. And if I can quickly come back here. So this princess or tiger drawing that I made, it's actually citing one of his books, where you have to solve this problem of finding the princess and not the tiger behind the closed doors, basing on some prerequisite descriptions that Raymond Smalling gives you. And it opens up your mind. It gives you this possibility to think logically in a nice and entertaining way. And if you don't want to entertain yourself, but to go straight away to this UX stuff, then you can read this Designing for the Digital Age. It's this thick. It's almost impossible to read the whole book because it's really huge, but it tells you like everything about the user experience design process, starting with how to prepare for the interviews and then going through all those user flows creation and so on and so forth. Kim Goodwin, I think, was a student and a co-worker of the great Alan Cooper, and she managed to write the book, which is even bigger than Alan Cooper's famous book. Okay, the next thing, it's about context. So here you just have to know how to ask questions and how to get more information than what is there on the surface. And it's useful just to know how to ask questions, not to be shy so that to ask questions, and know some techniques to dig deeper into the new information or context that might be there. The questions thing is really important. There are a lot of techniques and a lot of articles about the questions. I would say that the easiest thing to know is to distinguish the open questions versus closed questions. Mostly, if you need to know something new, you don't need closed questions at all, because these are the ones where the answer is yes or no. So you need to train the open questions. Then there are different classification of questions that also you can learn about. But I must tell you that the theoretical thing doesn't help a lot here. You mostly need to practice, because even if you know everything about recall and funnel questions, but you don't practice, you won't succeed. But let me stop a little bit on the funnel questions. It's when you need to dig deeper and deeper into the funnel within some new domain. One of the techniques which is really useful is the well-known 5 whys. Probably you all know about it, even if you're not using it in your everyday job. This is, something that psychotherapists like very much. When they ask you, why are you so sad? And you say, because I'm afraid to lose my job. And they ask you, and why are you afraid to lose your job? And you say, because I won't have any money. Why do you think you won't have any money? Because And then you just come back to the beginning and understand that there is nothing to be said about. So 5 whys is really great. And there is one more technique that I can mention here. This is this score technique. Mostly it's not about the new domain, but it's really useful when you want to understand the problem in general. And the abbreviation here comes from the symptoms, causes, outcomes, resources, and efforts. And I think you all had this situation when you go straight away from the symptoms to the resources, for example. So the client comes and tells you, we want to redesign our website. And you tell him, okay, here are 2 designers and 2 developers to help you with this. But then if you start asking about causes that led to this idea and the outcomes that this client wants to have, you might find out that he doesn't need this new website at all, but something completely different. So it's really great if you master those techniques. And the book which I want to recommend here is Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. You all probably know Richard Feynman, a famous physicist and a Nobel Prize winner, but he is also famous for his ability to dive into different new domains and different new things. I think it was typical for him to learn quickly some chemistry and to start teaching chemistry just out of fun. And this book, this is just a nice reading. It doesn't tell you how to learn this skill. These are mostly some stories from his life, but they're very nice. At the same time, he has really good pieces of advice on how to learn quickly. And one of the ideas that he tells about is to be able to explain the new or difficult thing to a 5-year-old child. If you manage to understand the idea so well that you can put it in a few words, then it will be good for you. And I also recommend writing summaries. Again, this is just a basic skill and basic knowledge, but let me tell you, my elder son studies in this classical gymnasium, and they, for example, they have 4 languages simultaneously, 2 modern languages and 2 ancient, including ancient Greek. So it's tons of information that they need to digest every day. And they teach those kids from the very beginning to write the summaries of like everything they have. And it's a really great skill. I mean that my son now reads every new book, keeping his notebook behind him because he writes down the main ideas and then he's able to grasp the meaning of the book much faster. Okay, let's go to the yellow section about communication. It's really my favorite, I can tell you. I have separate talks about how to communicate with the development team and how to develop soft skills in the UX team and so on and so forth, because really I find it one of the most important thing, as I told you. Every UX designer must be able to present his idea and to explain it and to articulate. And also it's important to know how to process feedback, because feedback is sometimes not very nice, and you need to be able to divide yourself, your work, and this feedback one from another, so that not to become a very sad UX designer. And let me show this thing. that is what I always tell to people. You cannot be expert UX designer without all those soft skills. Maybe sometimes you can if you work in some small startup in a tight group of people, all of them know each other. Maybe then it's enough if you are very good and fast in prototyping and know the material design guidelines by heart. But if you work for different clients, then the presentation and communication skills make half of your design skill set, truly. And a couple of books again. The first one is The Pyramid Principle by Barbara Minter. And it tells you how to not only specifically present your ideas, but how to articulate your thoughts. Barbara Minter created this pyramid idea when you start with some thesis and then you break it down into this tree structure, and it helps you to articulate your idea to the audience. For example, if you say something like, I think that all designers are very smart, then you can divide it into two parts. They're smart because they read a lot of books and because they, I don't know, watch a lot of design movies. And then you start explaining with some examples from the real life and with some statistics, the first part of your thesis and the second part, and then it turns into the whole. And the second book that I really like is Articulating Design Decisions. It's by O'Reilly. I really love O'Reilly's books in general, not only because they have nice birds and animals on the book covers, but also because they are usually packed with real life examples and are easy to read. And in this book, let me just tell you about one example of the advice from there. The author suggests that you use the same user experience design principles, not only when talking about the users, but also when you talk about stakeholders. For example, you always switch on your empathy and create those personas when you talk about end users in order to understand their feelings and frustrations and their life goals. But at the same time, it's great if you're able to do the same about the stakeholders, because then you may understand that their negative feedback, for example, is not about your design, but about not being able to present the results to their own management, for example, in time. The next is about being well watched. And here are basically two pieces of advice. The first one is to try to remember everything that you see. And the second is the technique that we also use with our trainees. We ask them to copy things. And if you want to start with something, when you start with the user experience training, it's really good to copy things, to copy interfaces, either real life interfaces or interfaces from Behance or Dribble, because this allows you to remember how the controls look like, how the buttons might look like, and it will be much easier for you to use them in your own designs. And this is a picture I want to share with you. This is my own picture from the time when I was getting ready for exams at the Design Academy. And I'm sorry for the quality. I asked my mom to take the picture because the physical picture is at her place, and you know how moms are with taking pictures. So anyway, the exam at the academy looked like this. You came to the room, they gave you the piece of paper, and then they gave you the topic. And it could be literally anything. It could be elevating machines or tropical forest, or as in this case, I don't know, fences. I don't remember what the topic here was, but probably fences or architecture or something like that. And the jury evaluated not only your composition skills per se, but also your ability to depict the detail. And in order to draw any detail, you needed to have it in your head somehow. So we spent the whole exam just trying to remember different things, so that if you are asked to draw something on the topic of elevating machines, you could go into your own head and find some details and mechanisms that you could depict in your drawing. And this is something that you can develop in yourself. For example, when ordering pizza, you can pay attention on how the controls are placed on the screen and where the order button is, and if it is convenient or not, and if you probably would have changed something. So just to notice all those little things and try to remember them and to get them out of your head when the time comes. Yeah, great. Yeah. I think I only have the last purple section about visual skills. Again, this is not about creating like great, I don't know, Spotify designs or visual designs that are going to win visual design awards, but just some basics. It's always useful to know something about grids and about fonts and color combinations. And it's very good to be able to be neat when you design even the basic prototype, just to align things left or right and not to be messy. And I will stop a little bit on Gestalt principles, because these are the principles that you probably need to know so that to start with something. There are articles describing them really well in the internet and giving the examples how to use them when we're talking about user experience design and prototyping. For example, if we talk about similarity, you must be able to understand that similar objects either are grouped together, so it will be weird if you scatter the menu items all over your screen. It's better to group them somehow. Or they can be distinguished by the color. For example, again, if you know that all your action buttons are green, please don't make them yellow occasionally, because it really confuses the user. And the principle that I think is one of the most important is about the proximity. And I wouldn't even talk about it, but I know that even seemingly experienced designers somehow make mistakes here. It's really funny, but because it seems to be so simple. You need to know the amount of space between the elements and how to group them in order to produce the right impression. For example, here the titles are closer to the blocks of text than to the next title. It's so basic, and people get confused here so many times. That's why I suggest that you pay attention to the proximity principle at the very beginning, because then it will be much easier for you to design anything. And again, a couple of books here. I don't have any books about proximity principle, but I have a couple of books about type, because I just like them myself. The first one is Just My Type. It won't tell you many useful, practical things about how to use type, but it is just such a funny and entertaining reading. I think it will help you to start understanding fonts and to start loving fonts, and it can also be useful, or at least maybe it will help you in some quizzes. They have those stories about how Comic Sans was born, for example, quite a funny story. And then there is this story about how IKEA changed their brand font from Futura to Verdana, and what a fuss happened all over the world about this. So I highly recommend this book just as a nice reading. And the second one, which is Type Matters, it's just a basic handbook. If you are starting to design something, it tells all the basics on how to design your texts. And it is also useful for more experienced designers, because even experienced people can forget about not leaving orphans or widows in the text blocks. But for the beginners, it's absolutely great. It's so easy to read, and it's so small, and I also like the leather book cover. So you can see that these are very, very different things to think about if you want to proceed somehow with user experience design. I must say that I think I've never seen a developer, like an experienced developer, turn into a user experience designer, not at least not a data art. I haven't seen that. But at the same time, if people start understanding how things work and how they do, it can help in different situations. For example, I'm sure if there is some startup and you don't have time for, or not time, but budget for a user experience person in your team, then you can start doing things yourself if you know the basics of how to do that. Yes, and that's actually it. Finished here. If you have questions now, I'll be happy to answer. Or,
Fantastic.
as I understood, we can meet later in some virtual room.
Thank you, Anastasia. That was a brilliant presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. We have a couple of questions people have dropped in chat while we've been going here. So Lucas says, how do you deal with customer requirements that require UX which goes beyond the limits of physics, e.g. Displaying huge amounts of data in milliseconds?
That's an interesting question. I think it's more about development though, but yeah, there is some connection. I mean, if it is displaying the huge amount of data per se, then it's about development, but at the same time there are some ways to work with it, so we really need some context. But I'm sure that the designer, if he or she understands the user scenarios, he can come with some solutions, such as, I don't know, wizard or steps, or gradually diving deeper into this information. So maybe there is no need to show everything at once. Who knows?
There's an interesting principle that I've read about A lot of the time, good UX is about how people perceive the experience. Like if you got something that takes calculation takes 5 seconds, but you click a button and nothing happens, and then 5 seconds it goes done, that's bad. Whereas you have something you could take 10 seconds as long as you start the progress bar immediately, because then people are like, I clicked it and it started and it's responding. So a lot of it is about, think about not the end user experience, but how they feel while the things are happening.
Yes,
But
yes, you are totally right. Of course, there are all those techniques that are being used, such as progress bars. They were invented for purpose.
Yeah, there's a famous anecdote about elevators in the skyscrapers in New York City that have a button, and when you push the button, the light comes on. Any effect on the elevators go where they're being sent by the control software, but people want to be able to push a button so they feel like they're in charge. So we got
Yeah.
another question: how to deal with a UX team when you're working on an agile approach and you need to build a completely new UI, but you don't have the details yet of the functions that are available. What kind of process would you recommend in that case?
That's quite a typical situation, and usually it's I think I need to switch on the lights though. So yeah, usually it's about having some workshops. We even gave a talk quite recently about those workshops. There are different techniques and types of workshops that help to understand what will happen in the system and to structure it somehow. For example, even this famous design thinking workshop is something to help you to understand who the users are, what they might need, and so on. And also some user research helps in many cases, because if you're not sure what you are building, then it's sometimes nice to ask the users and to know their opinion and what they want to achieve at all.
Cool, thank you. And the one final question. Out of all of the useful books, what book would you recommend for developers who have to do UX and UI if you could recommend only one? So if you could get every developer in the world to read one book about UX, what book would it be?
Mm, I wonder if it means that the book must be simple or difficult. Because
Yeah.
yeah I've never looked at it from the developer's perspective, I must say. That if you want just to know everything, then, well, I won't recommend this Kim Goodwin that I showed, because it's a little bit too much. But for example, Alan Cooper's, which is, how is it called? About UX? No. Anyway, you can find it. His most famous book. Uh, it just tells you all the basics, like how to look at the user experience process and then you can start from there, because he gives you the generic understanding of the user experience process and why it is important.
Have you ever read a book called The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman?
Yeah, so that's a good one
Yeah,
too. Yeah,
because that's a
it's
fantastic book.
yes, it's I think it's less practical, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly, than Alan Cooper's. Yeah, but
Yeah.
they're all good. Yeah.
That's anyone out there, if you've not read Don Norman's book, it's just called The Design of Everyday Things. And it kind of explains why all these little things in the world have been designed the way they have.
Hmm.
Bookshelves and ticket machines and all kinds of, it's a fantastic book. So,
Yes, yes,
um,
and I also recommend always this Viktor Papanek.
mhm.
Um, but again, it's not about practical thing, but it's about opening your mind and understanding the design world in general. It's really great.